Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields of Bourbon podcast, the podcast where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon and whiskey. I'm Jack, joined as always by my co-host Elijah. Today we're coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia. The Bell House is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, managing entity of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, and the official sponsor of the Battlefields of Bourbon podcast. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation. Head on over to their website at www.shenandoahatwar.org. That's www.shenandoahatwar.org. Click on ways to give. Head down to membership. Membership starts as low as $35 and go till you can't give no more. So if you want to support the podcast and you like what you hear, consider becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation today. Elijah.
Jack.
One breath. No. You could hear it a couple times in there. We got an exciting episode today. We're joined in the room by my good friend and professor, Jonathan Noyalas, author of thousands and thousands of books and articles. So he's in the room with us, but our glasses are empty, Elijah. So tell us what we're sipping on today.
We are sipping on Fighting Cock Bourbon Whiskey. This is from Heaven Hill Distillery. You wouldn't see it on the bottle because it says distilled, aged, and bottled by Fighting Cock Distilling Company. But that's not the case. This is a Heaven Hill product. It's 103 proof. You see it at any ABC store. It's not hard to find. It's like middle shelf, $20 bottle. So pretty easy to come across. If you're listening to this one, you hear about it, you haven't tried it, haven't heard of it, you can go find it, and it's not hard to get your hands on. But the mash bill for this one, looking at this off of Breaking Bourbon once again. Shout out to them for breaking down the mash bill for us. It's 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malted barley. And I don't believe there's an age statement on it, which, for a $20 bottle, what do you expect?
They don't have to.
Yeah, they don't have to. This isn't anything super, super fancy, but I've heard good things about it. I haven't heard anybody say that they dislike it. And for those listening, unfortunately, there's no cork to pop tonight. This is just a little plastic screw cap.
Hey.
So good unscrew, if that's what you want to call that.
This was a gift by listener Cindy Puree, who's been on the podcast before for a couple episodes, like the St. Albans Raid and Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. And this was a gift to me, which is now a gift to the podcast.
Gift to everybody.
Yeah. Smells like bourbon.
Yeah. It's got there's a smell to that I can't quite put my finger on. It's good. It's like almost like a marshmallow or like a maybe a little maple or something. There's something in there I can't quite.
It smells
pick
light,
out of it, like a maple syrup type of deal. I mean, it's not a flavored whiskey, so
no.
I don't want people to think that that's what that is. It's just straight bourbon.
Did you taste it?
Not yet.
I tasted it.
I'm still trying to think about what that smell is, but it's good. It is good.
I think it's really not a punch in the face for 103 proof.
No, that's very approachable. And I mean, the flavor profile is really good too. Again, has more of that like kind of maple marshmallow. I'm not really sure I'm trying to think of what it is. It'll come to me at some point and I'm probably just going to like blurt it out.
But go for it.
Whatever it is, I do like it. I mean, for being a normal, shelf option at $20.
Yeah.
It's not bad by any means.
Well, now that our glasses are full, I was thinking about a way to tie in this bourbon to our
Fighting Irish.
Well, like you said at the beginning, I thought Fighting Cock, maybe there's a thing there with Sheridan, but then I remembered back to when you were trying to tell us where it's from, and you said it's not on the bottle, you wouldn't know where it's from, and just like our topic today, General Philip H. Sheridan, we don't really know where he's from. We have some good ideas, but nothing possibly ever will be concrete about his origins. Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, like I introduced him briefly at the beginning, we're in the room with Jonathan Noyalas, and he has released a new book through Rutledge Historical Americans, which is a series they have, and this is the one on General Philip H. Sheridan, Life, War, and Memory. Mm-hmm. This came out when?
Came out in October.
Okay, so it's been out. This hopefully airs in January. So,
what number book is this for you?
This is book 17.
Book 17.
Good Lord.
Book 17.
Oh.
Yeah. This is not your first biography, though.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who else have you written about?
Robert Milroy. Yeah. So the two most popular guys in Winchester, right?
Yeah, come on. Yeah, but this was, And I guess before we dive into him a little bit, why Sheridan? How'd you get to Sheridan?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This was a book I never intended to write. So several years ago, I had a conversation with Paul Finkelman, who's a great constitutional scholar. He edits this series for Routledge, which is one of the largest academic publishers anywhere in the world. And he said, we really, want to kind of flesh out some of the major American figures. And we initially had a discussion. He said, well, what about writing about Lincoln? And, as much as a Lincoln guy I am, I thought I don't want to tackle that, it's that robust literature. And I said, well, what about Phil Sheridan? And I said, he's a guy who doesn't, really receive a lot of attention comparatively to Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman. And so we kind of, I planted the seed, wrote a proposal, and the publisher ultimately, accepted that. And so this is not a book that I ever set out, I want to write a biography of Sheridan, just kind of grew out of that conversation with Finkelman.
And you were familiar with him. It's not,
yeah. I spent a lot of time over the past 20-some years with Sheridan, obviously, in the Shenandoah Valley. And this gave me an opportunity to kind of really expand and answer. There were a lot of questions. You think about the biographies that are out there about Sheridan prior to the release of this one. Most people have probably read Roy Morris or Joe Whelan. And as good as they are, there's still a lot of questions that I had. And so that gave me an opportunity to answer some questions about Phil Sheridan.
And I think this is good for the podcast because we can balance out the George Crook episode we have with all of our good friends, Phil Spoggy. So, which if I remember correctly, probably didn't have the greatest things to say about Sheridan in that episode and their friendship. So I want to just kind of dive right into him, and we hinted towards it in the connection piece, but we don't know where he's from. If you want to kind of dive into why we don't know where he's from, and maybe some reasons for why we will never know.
Yeah, so this was the first question I had when I was researching this book, is where was he born? Because you read other biographers. Sheridan in his memoirs, he writes, "I was born in Albany, New York," so you think it's clear cut and done. Other biographers have said, well, he was born maybe in Ireland or in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And I thought, well, there has to be a way to, answer this very basic question: where was he born? And I came to the conclusion, and I write this in the book, we will never know. And so there are different schools of thought. Sheridan wrote in his memoirs, Albany, New York. But if you look at census records where they list, like in 1850, for instance, where are you born? It says Boston, Massachusetts. When Sheridan received his first commission coming out of West Point, when you sign that commission, you have to put where were you born, and he wrote Boston, Massachusetts. And then there, of course, have been other individuals, including family members, who have claimed, well, he was born in Killinkere, Ireland. There's a house in Ireland with a plaque on it that says Phil Sheridan was born here. And then some have speculated Somerset, Ohio, but that's really probably not likely. And so as I look at all of these potential places where he was born and Sheridan's lack of clarity, I think the reason, and I write about this in the book, the reason that we will never know is because of his mother. And so Sheridan's mom, Mary Sheridan, she absolutely hated the press. And so by 1880, Phil Sheridan became a name that was floated around every time there was a presidential election to run for the Republican nomination. And just as a little aside, other historians have said Phil Sheridan had, great presidential ambitions. And this was another question because, you've been in the classroom with me, Jack. You know that you can't just make a claim. It has to be substantiated with something. There is no evidence out there at all that says, Phil Sheridan wants to be president. There are, his name pops up in 1880, 1884, 1888. There are people who are certainly advocating for him. There are people who think he would make a great president. But Phil Sheridan wrote, he actually was interviewed by a newspaper journalist in 1880, and he said, I never had the presidential bee in my bonnet. He wanted no part in politics at all. But every time that this came up, newspaper reporters, they flocked to Somerset, Ohio to interview Mrs. Sheridan. Where was your son born? And of course, who knows better than a mom where her son was born? And essentially what she would do is she would bring newspaper reporters into her house one at a time. and she would give them a different answer every time. So he was born in Boston, he was born in Albany, he was born in Somerset. And when the interviews were over, all these reporters, I could kind of imagine them conglomerating outside the house, and they're like, "Well, what did she tell you? What did she tell you?" And they're like, "Damn, it's not a straight answer." And Mary Sheridan basically came out and said, "I gave them all different answers because I hated the press. Mm-hmm. I wanted to screw with the press." She had a little bit of a quirky kind of sense of humor, and so we'll never ever truly know. You think about birth and baptism records back in Ireland. Well, in that period where Sheridan was, when he was born in the early 1830s, like all the baptismal records from the parish that his family presumably would have belonged to are gone. And so this is one of those things, like, we can speculate. More than likely, I think he probably was born somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when the family was coming here. But there's not even clarity about how they even got to the United States. Because some accounts have him coming, the family coming from Ireland directly to the U.S., coming to New York City. Others say they went to Boston. I think more than likely they went through Canada. Because if they're coming from Ireland, they would have had to pay a British tax if you came through Canada, and then down to Boston. They eventually did settle in Albany for a little bit because he had an uncle who lived there. But again, that's one of those questions I don't think we'll ever truly have an answer to, because the records simply aren't there. We can speculate.
You wouldn't think either that she would be truthful with one reporter over another. So any of the answers that she's giving them are probably just misleading and all wrong. So the real answer is probably somewhere not said.
The family also, and one of the things that I write about in the book, there are other moments early on in life, Sheridan's life, where the question does come up. Like, for instance, when he's getting ready to go to West Point, where was he born? And again, you have to understand the context of the time here. Late 1840s, early part of the 1850s, Sheridan comes from an Irish Catholic family. So Irish Catholics are not welcomed really at all in the United States. I mean, that's the reason they moved to Somerset, Ohio, is because that was seen as a safe haven for Irish Catholics. And so, I think if the family was ever kind of covering up anything, I don't think it was to cover up, as a child, because he might have presidential ambitions. I mean, I don't think a lot of parents really look at their 8-year-old kid and like, wow, Phil's going to grow up to be president one day. I better lie where he was born. I think it had to do more with, as he gets older and approaches his teenage years, that the family can see his desire to go to West Point. They can see within him this desire to have a military career. And they already know, as an Irish Catholic, he has strikes against him. If he was an Irish immigrant, that would be another strike against him. So I think it's more about protecting him in that regard than safeguarding him for like 35, 40 years down the line if he ever decided to run for president.
And Boston's a good choice, too. I feel like that's like a patriotic type of thing to say you're from, something like in America's early days.
Yep.
That's a good thing to tie in if you want
points.
Yeah, shine a little bit of light on him in his youth. What kind of child was he? You said his parents recognized the military aspirations, West Point.
Yeah.
What around him is shaping him, and how is he?
So he was enamored with military service, and I think the thing that really is that sort of tide turning moment for him. He's about 7 or 8 years old, and there is an Independence Day celebration in Somerset. So there's the normal fanfare, the picnics and the fireworks and the celebrations and music and all that kind of stuff. And what Sheridan focuses on that day is an elderly gentleman. He's originally from New Jersey, served in the Continental Army during the Civil War, or during the Revolutionary War. His name was William Dusenberry. And Sheridan looked at this elderly man being paraded around town on a farm wagon, just dressed in a simple linen suit. And Sheridan, at that moment, as a young kid, was just struck. Like, here is a guy who fought for American independence and freedom. Here is a living link to that moment where we became an independent nation. And that was, from the perspective of Sheridan and his friends, like, that is the moment where he decides, I want to do everything I can to help the United States grow. I want a career in the military. And then, of course, as he was growing up, he had like a little kid militia company in Somerset that he drilled with a tin sword. And of course, there was a local militia unit in Somerset, and every time they drilled, like, he would just stop what he was doing and just watch them. He was so enamored with it all. William Tecumseh Sherman, he visits Somerset because his future wife lives, is attending school there. And so Sherman never remembers the encounter that he had with Sheridan, but Sheridan saw him, in his West Point gray cadet uniform, and was just so in awe of this. And that's really what Sheridan wanted to do, was to become a soldier. And that was his childhood obsession. And of course, he got to live out that dream.
Yeah. So he gets to West Point. Mm-hmm. Is he automatically in one of those spots, or is?
Yeah. So he's not. He gets in a sort of a convoluted way. There is a cadet from Ohio who ends up getting kicked out, a member of the very prominent Ewing family. And he's kicked out. The official records state it was for failing a test. I think it was much more than failing a test, because we'll talk about what Sheridan did, and he wasn't expelled, infinite amount of time either. But so Sheridan kind of, there's an opening. He gets to West Point, and it's interesting because when he receives that appointment to go, he doesn't have the concern that normal cadets have. So, like, normal people, when they are, receive a commission at West Point, they're nervous about, like, the entrance exam and the classes I have to take. And he was freaking out before he even got there about the shoes. So I write about this, he writes about this in his memoirs. And so this illustrates, like, how very powerful of a moment this is for him. And West Point sent a list in the mail of everything Sheridan had to bring. And on the list, it said Monroe shoes. And he's like, what are Monroe shoes? Like, he didn't know. He's like, just shoes. And he was freaking out because he's like, I don't know what these are. It turns out one of his brothers did some research, and Monroe was just like a brand name. So like Nike or Adidas or whatever the case is. And so he gets the shoes and he goes to West Point. But when he's there, of course, he understands he has limitations. He has basically, he stops his formal education in school at the age of 14, works in a number of stores in Somerset as a bookkeeper. And so the guy who kind of helps him along is Henry Slocum, who goes on, to Corps Command during the Civil War. And Sheridan was doing good. He's always kind of in the middle of the pack, of his classes at West Point. And I write about this in the book, and I always tell people that, they ask, like, what was the greatest obstacle for Phil Sheridan when he was at West Point? And honestly, the greatest obstacle was Phil Sheridan, right? And his temper. And look, I think if you look at his life, there are moments where he simply cannot control himself. And we see this when he's a student at West Point. There's a moment in time where they're having dress parade. And Cadet Sergeant William Terrell, who was from Virginia, is ordering the men to dress. And Sheridan thought he was dressed. Well, Cadet Sergeant Terrell didn't think he was dressed, and he got in Sheridan's face, and Sheridan didn't like it. And of course, these two guys have been going at it for a couple of weeks and months prior to this. Terrell always, giving Sheridan demerits for the most minor infraction. And Sheridan finally said, enough is enough. He took his musket, had a fixed bayonet on it, and he lowered it and started going after Terrell. And right when he got to that moment where he's like, oh, I might stab him in the chest, there was that good little angel on Sheridan's shoulder that said, you better put that back in his shoulder arms and get back in the line. And he did. Obviously, Terrell wrote him up for this. He as he should have. And then a couple days later, Sheridan saw Terrell sitting on the steps of one of the barracks at West Point and just went off. Like, he went up to him and started punching him in the head. And there was a terrible fight that broke out. And ultimately, what ended up happening, Henry Brewerton, who was the superintendent of West Point at the time, he looked at the case and he decided to expel Sheridan for a year. So instead of graduating in 52, he graduated in 53. And this is why, I think about Ewing and why he was expelled and the spot became open. Like, Sheridan is threatening to kill another cadet, getting into a fight, and he's expelled for an academic year, and he comes back. So Brewerton certainly saw something within Sheridan and thought, I have to discipline you. But what's interesting, Brewerton, his son, is the Brewerton that commands the battery at Cedar Creek on the morning of the 19th. So it's interesting to think about, if Brewerton's father didn't, if he just expelled him outright and Sheridan was a bookkeeper, how things would have worked out differently.
Yeah,
it's a big what if.
Yeah,
there's a lot of big what ifs in here.
That is a good one.
I think it's interesting too, the temper. You see it here at West Point. You kind of see it when he was a kid. Like you said, he was leading groups around as militia. There was like gangs in Somerset, right?
Yeah.
And he had some altercations with a teacher. And so you see this side of Sheridan when he's young, when he's at West Point. Maybe this is some illusion in my head. Wasn't there a connection with Crook and Sheridan at West Point, or is that something that's developed in the post-war years? Or,
So I mean, Crook and Sheridan have a relationship, going back to pre-war years, and of course, during the Civil War, they spend time together in the Valley, and then that relationship gets strained, and the strain really happens after the war. There's issues that happen during the Indian Wars. The way that Crook responds in 1886 to the Apache issues, that just kind of breaks and strains that relationship. But really, and I'm going to bring this back to Winchester right now. What really kind of hurts that bond is, and of course at this point Phil Sheridan is dead. But when Sheridan's memoirs come out in December of 1888, George Crook reads the memoirs, as a lot of veterans and subordinates do. And George Crook gets to that point where Sheridan's writing about the Third Battle of Winchester. And in that passage, Sheridan basically claims credit for George Crook's flank attack. And of course, he basically says, I'm the one who orchestrated it, I'm the one who planned it, I'm the one who told him to do it. And we know, right, that historically that's not the case. He brings Crook up, early that afternoon. Crook had been held in reserve for most of the battle up to that point. And he says, go out to our far right and watch the right flank, protect the right flank. And of course, Crook gets there. He sees that he's squarely on the Confederate flank, and he's the one who decides to launch that assault. And so in the memoirs, Sheridan mentions Crook not at all. And this is like, he does this because I wanted him to do it. And I know my good buddy Phil Spoggy is a George Crook guy, not taking anything away from George Crook. But, as a historian, it's interesting to note why people write what they do when they do and what influences them. And so, if you only take that passage from Sheridan's memoirs, Sheridan looks like a jerk. He looks like a self-serving, pompous, egotistical, self-centered person. If you look at the report and the correspondence that Sheridan sends to Grant on the night of September 19th, 1864, it doesn't jive, right? Because he praises Crook and his command, Crook taking initiative. It's one of the real major reasons we won at 3rd Winchester. He recommends to Grant that George Crook be promoted to Major General. So, those things don't jive with each other. And so as a historian, you have to ask yourself, well, why is this the case? And so, what is Sheridan basing his memoirs off of? And Sheridan doesn't write his report of Winchester until 1866. So it's 2 years later. And at this point, Sheridan is in New Orleans. He's dealing with Reconstruction. He's dealing with the Ku Klux Klan. He's dealing with ex-Confederates. He's dealing with issues in Mexico and Maximilian. So he has a full plate, in essence, right? It's not just like he's sitting back somewhere, relaxing, doing nothing. And so the report is written, and in that report, he doesn't give George Crook the same credit that Crook received right after the battle. And so more than likely, right, when Sheridan's writing his memoirs, he starts the process in late 1886, finishes them in the spring of 1888. More than likely, Sheridan is using those official reports to inform him. And it's interesting because when George Crook, reads the memoirs, he's like, he doesn't have any kind things to say about Sheridan at all. But there are people who serve with George Crook, like Henry DuPont, his chief of artillery, who says, I wonder something, because he remembered right? What Sheridan wrote about Crook right after the Third Battle of Winchester. And Henry DuPont wondered, is Sheridan writing this, maliciously, wanting to claim credit for himself, or is he just misremembering? Because you think about the circumstances, right? It's 2 years later. Sheridan's under enormous pressure. His mind is occupied with other things. And then you sit down 20 years later and writing your memoirs, and memories fade and those types of things. And of course, Sheridan is afflicted with heart disease at this point. So he's not writing under ideal conditions. And so Henry DuPont comes to the conclusion that, like, George Crook should basically forgive Sheridan because he doesn't think it was done intentionally. If Sheridan, from that moment right after Third Winchester, would have said, yep, I'm the one who should get all the credit, then yeah, I could understand that. So there's a disparity in those written accounts. Crook never forgives. I mean, until Crook died in 1890, he still held a lot of animosity to Sheridan for that and for other reasons. But I think Henry DuPont, and I remember reading DuPont's, and this is in his memoirs, remember reading that, and I thought, well, how well balanced and nuanced you are, right? That's how we're supposed to look at the past. In order to make these judgments, you have people write what they write, but oftentimes people don't consider why is someone writing what they're writing, and what are the influences, what is the environment like around them, how does that influence what they write?
Sorry, go ahead, Elisha.
It sounds like, to me at least, that given like the big picture of what all he's got going on in 1866, the war is over. To me, it feels like he thinks that there's no real need to go into such detail on the report because, war's done. There's nothing to gain from it.
Right.
If he would have written it after the battle where he's putting in a recommendation for Crook to get promoted and all this stuff, there's something to gain from that because you have, your right-hand man.
Right.
You can help him out. He can help you out in a better leadership role, something of that nature. Whereas at this point, war's over. It's almost a distant memory. Why am I going to go into extreme detail at this point when I've got other things to worry about?
I think there's a lot of merit to that. And again, when you spend time writing a biography of someone, you really get to know them deeply and well, and you kind of understand their temperament and the tone of their writing a little bit. And I kind of get the sense that when Sheridan is reminded, don't forget to submit your report of what happened 2 years before, he's like, seriously, really? I'm kind of busy down here dealing with all of these things. And I think it's doing it to get it done. And you're right. There's nothing to be gained because at that point.
I also feel like with that, I mean, you look at their friendship and everything, and it almost seems like if you like get a text message from a friend and you can't understand their tone of voice because it's a text message. Same thing as like
it's
if
like
you're
all
reading,
caps versus that's
Whereas
a good way to put it.
If you're reading a written report and it's not exactly worded the way you want it to be worded, where you're involved in it, then you're like, I don't really know how to take that.
And that's the thing, and it's I think it's sort of out of character. So again, you have to look at the body of Sheridan's writing. So if you look at everything that he wrote in terms of communications and reports written in the moment or in the immediate aftermath of battle, I don't think he has ever an instance where he's like, we won because of me.
Yeah.
He's always giving credit to his men. He's always saying, promote this person, promote that person. So it's kind of out of character when you look at the totality of everything he has written.
He's not a selfish guy.
No, and it's unfortunate that Crook took it the way that he did because it's not like he could just call him up on the phone and be like, hey, what'd you mean by this?
Yeah.
Right.
So he just kind of like lived it out.
I mean, it's even the thing, when the thing that kind of really breaks the relationship in the mid 1880s when Crook is dealing with the Apaches and trying to negotiate peace and get them under reservations and stuff. Sheridan is the one who's kind of intervening with the War Department on Crook's behalf, saying like, I trust this guy, he can get the job done. And ultimately, when Crook asks to resign from his command, it's because of what officials in Washington, not Sheridan, are wanting Crook to do. And Crook kind of blames Sheridan for that.
So were they not roommates at West Point? Because there's that picture of them when they're young.
Yeah. I mean, they are certainly, whether they're rooming together.
Okay.
I mean, Slocum is a roommate.
Yeah.
But certainly they're close knit.
Okay.
comrades at
Yeah.
at the academy.
Okay. That was something interesting that I was like reading it, and I was
Yeah.
like, I thought that's where you're really going to start to see the blossom of this friendship.
Because that picture's Crook Sheridan.
I don't know, and
Custer,
yeah,
isn't it?
that illusion of the
Right.
photograph just makes you think they're
Right.
best buds
Yeah.
at West Point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a tight knit group. Period. Okay, so West Point, we got the crook stuff out of the way. There you go, Phil. You can stop listening now.
This is where he tunes out.
Yeah, this is where we'll lose
No,
Phil. We'll see the drop. But I think what I found fascinating was he jumps right. Really, I mean, he kind of jumps right into military service, and he gets sent out west.
Right.
How does the West shape him before the Civil War? I mean, if you just want to highlight some of the things he's doing out there.
Yeah, I mean, when Sheridan, I mean, he has different posts in Texas. He spends a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest. But wherever Sheridan goes, what is paramount for him is to A, lead by example, and to do everything in his power to forge a strong bond with his men. And so, again, one of the things that is most striking, and you see this, like Sheridan, after the Civil War, once he is in a more prominent position, late 1870s, early 1880s, he's delivering commencement speeches at West Point. And the tone of them is all the same, like, make certain you take care of the men, they will take care of you. And he gets this right from the beginning. So when he is along the border, coming out of West Point along the Rio Grande, it's a dry, desolate region. There's not a lot of vegetables, and his men are suffering from scurvy. So there's a plant that grows in Texas. It's part of the agave family. It's called the maguey plant. And so you take this, it's almost like a cactus-like thing. You take it and you squeeze it, and there's like this white juice that comes out of it. Pulque, it's called. And once you take that pulque and you ferment it, it creates, it's basically an antidote. It's a remedy for scurvy. So like if you're not getting enough of fruits and vegetables, you take this, it'll keep you healthy. And the problem is, and Sheridan wrote about this in his memoir. So again, like those weird things that he's focusing on, that tells me, that's signaling to me like this is a big deal. So he writes about the shoes, he writes about the plant. It smelled like rotten meat. So it's not a very, so we've got
rough.
bourbon here, so that's,
Smells a little better.
palatable, but the pulque from the maguey plant is not palatable at all. And so Sheridan is trying to figure out, like, how do I get my men to drink this stuff? And so every morning at roll call, he's like, I'm just going to stand up here and drink my ration
In front of them.
In front of them,
Yeah.
and he does it, and they're like, oh well,
Very
he's
selfless.
doing it, I've got to do it too. And I think that is like one of the critical early moments where Sheridan just gets it, right?
Yeah.
So he's kind of middle in the pack at West Point as a student, but he understands what it means to be a leader. Like you have to lead by example. You cannot ask your men to do things that you aren't willing to do yourself. And he does that everywhere he goes, whether it's Texas or the Pacific Northwest. And of course, when he's also out there, he's fighting engagements with indigenous peoples. And this is where we start to see Phil Sheridan, he has not really kind things to say about indigenous peoples at all. He sees them as barbaric, as savages, as uncivilized, as obstacles to American manifest destiny, which of course is what, a lot of Americans, white Americans at this time see. And of course, we see that develop before the war, and then it takes a break during the Civil War, and then after the war, once he's done with Reconstruction in Louisiana and Texas, and he becomes really the dominant fighter of indigenous peoples. I mean, he does some horrendous things. I mean, I'm pretty bold in the book saying he's a proponent of ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, that somebody that's an Irish Catholic that would have faced, significant discrimination in his time is turning that against another minority group. You would think that he would kind of
but
sympathize.
it's actually not that unusual. So you look at race relations in the United States. There was a lot of animosity between Irish immigrants and African Americans.
It's always an us versus
Because
them
that's
type of
right.
thing.
Because Irish immigrants saw the African American population as competitors in the job market. So they're both like down here in the social ladder, the lower rung, and so they're competing for those low paying jobs. And so you're right. It is kind of this us versus them mentality.
Well, I'm sure it was easier. I don't want to say easier, but for Sheridan to go, even though there's all the other issues with, blacks at the time and Irish immigrants, and we all dress one way and look one way and talk one way and fight one way. And if we want to continue, at least there's the easy out. And I mean, is it here and we're not, I don't want to overshadow it. We'll continue it post-war, but is it out west at this point when he's in command of troops and starts to understand a little bit of the logistics of moving troops when they fight, when they're transporting things?
He starts to understand, and again, there's a lot of lessons that he learns in the 1850s fighting against indigenous peoples. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think he gains a very healthy respect for Mother Nature. He understands the role that like winter weather can play on military campaigns. There was a campaign he was involved in against Chief Kamiakin and the Yakima in the mid-1850s. And he looked at, Gilbert Rains commanded that expedition, and Gilbert Rains, just refused when you had these terrible snowstorms, like 2 to 3 feet of snow and heavy winds and squalls and stuff. He refused to turn back and go back. And the campaign against Kamiakin and the Yakima was a disaster. And so Sheridan kind of learned about, Mother Nature at that point, ideal conditions. He started to learn about like the importance of being mobile, like you can't bring a lot of stuff with you. And then he also learned what leadership did not look like, because after that campaign against the Yakima, Rains is going after subordinates and saying like, you're the reason we lost and you're the reason this was a failure, never accepting any responsibility for himself. And that's one thing that Sheridan, I think, throughout his military career, by and large, does not do. Like if things don't go his way, he kind of owns it. So, I think about, someone asked me, I did a talk yesterday evening, and somebody asked me about like compared Sheridan and Jubal Early in the Valley in 1864. How are they similar? How are they different? And, after Cedar Creek, this, both of you, Jubal Early publishes this notice in Virginia newspapers just trashing his army. Like the reason we lost is because you all abandoned your posts and were looting Union camps, and he accepts none of the responsibility or blame for himself, whereas Sheridan doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm. And we see that. There's cool moments of that in the war, especially when it's just not even tactical faults on the battlefield, but just like disagreements between him and some of his, subordinates or other generals, to where he's like, I'm right, or something like that. And then he may have been wrong, but he still apologizes later, no matter, or in front of his men or things like that.
Yeah, and that's the remarkable part of Sheridan. And I write this in the book, right? He's a human being. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, you've heard me say this, Jack, all the time, multiple things can be true at the same time. So he can both be a hard-nosed guy, or he can be someone who is apologetic. And so there's a couple of instances I write about in the book. One, of course, happens at the Battle of Fisher's Hill. As the Union attack is driving the Confederates from the battlefield like dominoes from west to east, Sheridan's riding down the line. He's cheering on the men. He's urging the men. And then he gets to the 19th Corps. He gets to the area where Cuvier Grover's division is, and they're really not moving at all. And of course, the closer you get to the Valley Pike at Fisher's Hill, we know it gets steeper. The terrain is much more rugged and more difficult to navigate. And so Phil Sheridan is wondering, like, okay, why is the 19th Corps not moving like Crook's Command or Horatio Wright's Corps? And like the first officer he could find is Colonel Edward Molyneux, brigade commander in Grover's division. He just curses him out, dresses him down. Molyneux is so ticked off, as he should have been, so much so that he threatens to resign his. He doesn't threaten. He wants to resign his commission so that he can challenge Sheridan to a duel and shoot him in the head. And Molyneux has a discussion with William Emery, the Corps commander, about this, and Emery's like, just relax, chill out. Emery has a discussion with Sheridan, and Sheridan, upon further reflection, is like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on. I was caught up in the moment. And so then there's a moment a couple days after the Battle of Fisher's Hill where Sheridan forms up Molyneux's brigade, and in front of the brigade, he apologizes to him. And Molyneux writes something to the effect of, this is the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Mm-hmm. And there are other moments, like he does it to an Illinois regiment before the Battle of Stones River. And so if Sheridan felt that he was wrong, he was going to apologize upon further reflection. If there are moments where he doesn't think he's wrong, it's too bad. That's just the way. It's just the way it is.
It's one thing to apologize to someone like behind closed doors, one-on-one, but to do it in front of an audience is another thing.
Yeah, there's at least two instances that I write about in the book before Stones River and after Fisher's Hill, where he is apologizing after Fisher's Hill to a brigade, and after, right before Stones River to a regiment.
Yeah. Well, to learn more about him in the West before the war, definitely read the book, because I think that's where you start to see a lot of what shapes the man we all know during the war. So as war starts to come and, things build up and we get to this moment, did you learn more, or did you discover a lot about his reactions and personal feelings towards the Civil War's beginning and what's leading to it, or just the brink of war arriving?
Yeah, so one of the great questions I had in this going into this project is what were Sheridan's perspectives about slavery and the coming of war? Because in his memoirs he really doesn't write a great deal about it, and as I kind of piece together the evidence, Sheridan, when the war breaks out, he doesn't have really kind things to say about abolitionists. Like he sees them as agitators. But as the war goes on, and as Phil Sheridan has more interactions with enslaved people, he starts to understand like the inextricable connections between slavery and the war. And he also understands that this is something that needs to go away, that slavery needs to be abolished. And it's striking to me, like these are all new things that I discovered. When Sheridan spends time in Tennessee in 1863, there are regularly enslaved people running toward Union lines, and there are two African-American women that Sheridan employs, and then when he heads east to command the Army of the Potomac Cavalry Corps, he sends one of them to Somerset, Ohio to live and work with his family, and the other one ends up moving to New Orleans, and he visits her on different occasions. And then he just kind of goes through this evolution. It's interesting to see. Then you get to the aftermath of the war, and Sheridan, he is a great advocate for black equality when he's in New Orleans. He is seen as a great ally of black people. And then, of course, by the time the 15th Amendment rolls around, Sheridan's out there giving speeches in favor of the 15th Amendment. And again, I had always thought, because nothing had been written about this, I thought, well, Sheridan was clenched-jawed. He was tight-lipped about this. And that's not really the case, because Sheridan, he does give, Sheridan, traditionally didn't like to speak to reporters a great deal, but he knew he had to do it. And so, you look at the bibliography, I gave a copy to my mom. My mom's not a big reader, but I give her a book every time I write one. And she looked at the bibliography, she's like, oh my God, look at all the newspapers you used. And Sheridan does, offer some really important insight in these interviews and these speeches he gives about how his attitudes and perspectives evolve. And of course, what I think remained constant throughout the war from the very beginning, when he's coming from the Pacific Northwest, then to Missouri and all that kind of stuff, is his hatred for the Confederacy. That is constant. He sees them from day one as traitors and rebels, deserving of nothing but death and defeat. This is something he carries with him to the grave. There's a point in the book where I write about an exchange between John B. Gordon and Sheridan. And this is in the early 1880s, when Sheridan is already commanding general of the army, and John B. Gordon, who was commanding a division here in the Valley in 1864. He's asking Sheridan for help for Confederate veterans, guys who have lost legs and arms and stuff like that. And Sheridan writes him back, and if you kind of read between the lines, essentially what Sheridan is saying is, I feel no sympathy for them because they were on the wrong side, and therefore they deserve everything that they got. I'm not going to help you at all. Mm-hmm. And so like that remains a constant. And so, yeah, I mean, Sheridan is always going to be, like, you see evolution with some things, and with other things, it's constant. I mean, even when you get into the 1880s, when they're toying around with returning captured Confederate flags to the States, Sheridan's like, no, not going to do it at all.
Mm-hmm. Which was, I think you mentioned that in there.
Yeah,
that was something I didn't know that happened, and part of me was like, well, you captured them, like, why are we returning? But that's a whole different reconciliation post-war aspect. So, do you have something?
There's something that's peeking through. So, and this might be a little controversial. Mm-hmm. So, Sheridan is, he's advocating for, rights for African Americans. He's very heavily against the Confederacy. Mm-hmm. However, he's very adamantly opposed to Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And it almost seems as though he's trying to play, I don't want to say the patriot, but like towing the line, so to speak, as far as the national agenda at the time. So, with the Union being, African American rights and that sort of thing, he's like, oh, I'm all for it. Being against Native Americans and trying to squash any kind of wars out west, he's like, okay, I'm all for that. Yeah. And then being against any sort of anything to help the Confederacy or the veterans of the Confederacy, he's like, no, you guys were wrong. It's almost like he's trying to be that poster child for, being a patriot and that sort of thing. And it's interesting.
Well, it's very Republican at the time. I mean, for Republicans at the time, he's
to look at all the things that he sides with and sides against, and that sort of thing.
Well,
some of them kind of seem a little double standard.
You examined him at a personal level. Yeah. Public writings and private writings. That sees that, though? Well, no, that's a good assumption at face value.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems like how do you determine if it was a real deep personal change versus
status quo? Like,
he's just meeting what's publicly happening too.
Yeah, which, I think, Phil Sheridan, like a number of people in the United States, regarding indigenous peoples, doesn't see them as people. Like, I know that's a terrible thing to say.
Which is so crazy
in 2025.
An incremental standard, like, okay, they're just now seeing African Americans as people, and then it's going to take another, how many years before they see Native Americans as people, and they're just going step by step.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I think the reality is, and this is where I am not kind to Sheridan's legacy at all in the book. Sheridan very much has this vision of manifest destiny, right? That goes back to the 1820s and 30s. And he sees indigenous peoples as the great obstacle to fulfilling that. And so, I mean, there are horrific things that he does, like he condones the starvation of certain groups of indigenous peoples when they're captured. No food, no water, and of course, it leads to a revolt among the indigenous populations. He condones the killing of women and children. Like, he's not leading these men in combat. He is commander of the Division of Missouri, which is essentially all Indian territory. And so, but he's applauding what his subordinates are doing, where he could intervene, because there are people like George Crook and Alfred Terry after the war who are saying, yeah, we get what the government wants to do, but like this, like there's a threshold, there's an ethical threshold.
This is a little
bit too far. And Sheridan just doesn't care. He sees them as barbaric, uncivilized, savage. And as I write, like, he's a proponent of ethnic cleansing, just to eliminate their culture altogether. But yeah, this is the thing. So like the last, sentence in the book, I write that Sheridan is basically a lot of things. He's a liberator. He's an oppressor. He's a massive contradictions. And he is, because you look at this like, well, how, I mean, my God, the guy is supportive of suffrage for black people. How great is that? And he's a great ally of them. Then, oh my God, you look at what he does to indigenous peoples, and like, how horrific is that? So yeah, he is picking and choosing. But I think when you look at Sheridan's attitudes toward black people, he was such a strong proponent of the 15th Amendment because he believed that they earned the right. because of their sacrifice during the Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he didn't think that even though he has indigenous scouts who are attached to him before the war and after the war, he never really sees them as worthy, never sees them as civilized, sadly.
Yeah.
So a lot of it boils down to military service, but for the right cause.
Correct.
I mean, he's a military. That's what
Yeah,
the one
yes.
thing I took
Big
away
military
was.
guy.
Yes.
That is who he is.
Right.
He is like through and through. He is the military.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I mean, not to make excuses, but Sheridan's not acting on his own accord here. He's doing what the government wants him to do.
Yeah.
He's an agent of the government. William Tecumseh Sherman is, before Sheridan becomes commanding general, Sherman's his immediate boss. And Sherman is has the same perspective that Sheridan does regarding indigenous peoples.
Yeah. So let's get him into the war.
Okay.
So he there April of 1861. Where is he? And then where does he go?
Yeah, he's out in the Pacific Northwest. He ends up coming to area around St. Louis, Missouri, 1862, and then his first assignment is a bookkeeping assignment to really help Henry Halleck sort out John C. Fremont and all the stuff that Fremont did. And then Sheridan has like this meteoric rise. So he is the quartermaster and chief commissary for the Department of the Southwest. He is, very quickly people begin to realize his talents, his abilities in logistics, supplying the troops, keeping the army very mobile. And then you get to, spring of 62, where he goes from commander of the 2nd Michigan Cavalry. A couple weeks later, he's a cavalry brigade commander. And then, within, from late spring of 62 until, mid 63, he goes from colonel to major general.
Yeah.
So, it's a really meteoric rise. He skips over from, captain to full bird colonel, and then he's off to the races.
And he's young.
Yeah. He's 31 years old, right, when the Civil War starts. And so, Sheridan has this meteoric rise, and it's due in part to the fact that he is aggressive on the battlefield. He is organized and disciplined, and everywhere he goes, he is able to forge a bond and a relationship with his men. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the secret sauce for Phil Sheridan, is he understands the only way I'm going to get my men to fight for me is if they like me. And the only way they're going to like me is if I lead by example. And, I'm not saying it's hard to quantify things as a historian. I'm not saying 100% of his men loved him.
Yeah.
But it's clear from looking at letters and diaries, things written in the moment. So again, not all primary sources are created equal. You can look at a regimental history written 40 years later where people have an opportunity to use hindsight and look back. Those are valuable source materials, but for me, what's more significant and valuable are things written in the moment. And, it's a rare thing to see a soldier under his command, whether it's colonel of the 2nd Michigan or division commander of the Army of the Cumberland, where they're just like, I hate Phil Sheridan.
Yeah.
There are some guys who groan about him because he is so disciplined. But, the large majority of these guys adore him, they love him, and they will fight for him because he is one of them.
Yeah, and I think that was something I realized as I was reading was these guys really do love him. And then part of me was trying to imagine myself as Sheridan having to leave every time you're as you're promoted up, you're kind of around your guys, but especially as he's moved theaters of the war, I was like, what a morale gut punch is that when this guy, that's great. Mm-hmm. Win or lose, he's there with you every step of the way, and now he's gone.
Right, and it's just when he leaves the West to come east to command the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac, he writes about being on the train and seeing his guys on a hill, and they're crying, and he gets teary-eyed because they've been through a lot together.
That's and you do a good job of that in the book. Is you don't do full battle narratives, but you set it up to where what Sheridan and his men went through there.
Yeah.
And then when you send him off west or east, part of me was like, oh my gosh, that sucks. I've never I've been with the Battlefields Foundation for a long time, and I've lived in Winchester, so I haven't really been separated from things like that for a while. But I can just imagine all those battles and those struggles. And then now you're getting on a train and you're leaving your men. I'm like, oh, that like, it made me feel for a moment. I was like, that poor guy.
Yeah.
And then the poor men.
And that's the thing. Like, and when he comes east, like the initial perspectives of the cavalry, officers and soldiers, like,
who the hell is this guy?
Who is this guy? Why is someone who, not from within, promoted to command the cavalry corps? And it's remarkable. I mean, Sheridan from, when he arrives that spring until he leaves to come to the valley in the summer, I mean, he spends a limited amount of time with these guys, but the bond he's able to form, it's amazing. Like, I mean, the Cavalry Corps is the one who gives him the nickname Little Phil. Like, that's something, Edward Toby of the 1st Maine, he writes about, like, how when Sheridan came, there was this animosity. He's an outsider. And then by the time he left, like, we're going to miss him so much. Yeah. And everywhere he goes, when he moves on to a different command, like, his old guys are still keeping tabs on him. And I think that's so powerful, to see letters from like guys who serve in an Illinois regiment in the Army of the Cumberland are watching what Sheridan is doing in Virginia. Yeah. And they're recording their thoughts. So that shows the great affection that they have for him.
They care enough to mention it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's cool to see in the post-war, as he's making the circuit, especially like in the reunion times, that draw an effect he has on men across the country, veterans of the war across the country. As he's brought west, what's that relationship like with him in command of the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac and like Meade, let's say?
Yeah.
In those battles or in the Overland campaign.
Not great. So Meade and Sheridan had very different perspectives about the role of cavalry. So Meade is a little bit more old school, use them for reconnaissance, use them to guard, lines of supply, wagon trains, those types of things. And Sheridan sees the cavalry as a great offensive weapon, right? You've got the horse, you've got the rider. Let's use our cavalry to fight their cavalry. And of course, Ulysses S. Grant, the one who brings him east, the one who puts him into that position, Grant agrees with Sheridan. And so there's a lot of friction there between George Gordon Meade and Sheridan. Meade, of course, when Sheridan becomes commander of the Middle Military Division, the Army of the Shenandoah, Meade has a lot of resentment because he thinks like, maybe I'm the one who should be given that command, an opportunity to get out from under Grant's shadow and command troops in this important theater of war here in the Shenandoah Valley. And so, again, they have a lot of arguments, a lot of shouting matches, Sheridan using a lot of very colorful language in those discussions, we'll say. But what's interesting to me, and I remember having a conversation with Jen Murray, who's the great Meade scholar, about this, and again, not denying that there was bad blood between them and animosity. But what I think is very telling when I was doing the research, and this is something I didn't put in the book because I have a limited space in terms of word count. Sheridan, when he became commanding general of the Army, was decorating his office in Washington, D.C., he hangs up a portrait of George Meade. Yeah. And so, I can't imagine hanging up a painting of someone who I don't like in my office. So it illustrates that, Sheridan is someone who could have differences with people, but can respect them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case.
Well, because I don't think you see Meade do Sheridan wrong.
Right.
Or screw him over. Mm-hmm. There's differences and disagreements, but there's never malicious, actions taken against one another.
And his temper only really flares up when it's like when he takes it personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's moments, right? So Meade is he writes letters to his home or to his wife at home while the Valley campaign's going on about like he's keeping tabs on Sheridan, like, hey, great, he won at Winchester. I think it was after Fisher's Hill. Meade throws a champagne party at his headquarters celebrating the victory. So, there's again, multiple things can be true at the same time. Yeah. So there is friction between those two guys. They have arguments, but I think there is a level of respect there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is always something that's fascinating me. I've heard you talk about it at the, McCormick Civil War Institute programs before, but Sheridan I think this story is cool because Grant's involved, Lincoln's involved. The selection of Sheridan to the Army of the Shenandoah. How does that play out? Is everyone on board for Sheridan at once?
No, I mean, so there are choices, and Sheridan's not the first choice. So William B. Franklin, who's a Democrat, was very close confidant of Grant's. Like, that was Grant's first recommendation, and Lincoln's like, no, he's a Democrat. Yeah. I don't think so. And then George Meade is recommended for the post, and Lincoln says, well, if we do it now, I've been under pressure to get rid of Meade ever since Gettysburg. And so if I do it, it looks like I'm caving to political pressure on the eve of the election. And so we get to this moment in time where Sheridan is the choice. And Lincoln has reservations. Edwin Stanton has the most reservations. And it's really because of Sheridan's age. Sheridan at this point, he's 33 years old. And Stanton doesn't think that Phil Sheridan has enough of experience to handle such an important independent command here in the Valley. And really what's the selling point for Grant to Lincoln and Stanton is the ability that Sheridan has to connect with his men. Because Grant sees it firsthand in the West, and everywhere Sheridan goes, he does that. And so, Grant is basically telling Lincoln, wherever Sheridan goes, his men will fight for him because they have a strong connection to him, and that is a huge selling point. And you see that play out. Like, there are guys who even recognize, they might not have recognized it initially, but they see it. So like Horatio Wright, right? So when he is in temporary command at Cedar Creek and the Army is attacked, and of course there's a whole, all the backstory there with Wright basically undoing a lot of Sheridan's directives before Sheridan left to go to Washington, D.C. But when, Wright is on the battlefield that morning, he's trying to reorganize. So Wright reorganizes some of those broken troops north of Middletown. But Horatio Wright wrote a letter to his wife a couple days after the Battle of Cedar Creek, basically saying, I was so glad when Phil Sheridan arrived because he had the ability to do something, the one thing that I could not, and that was inspire the men with his presence. He instilled confidence into them with his presence. And that, going back to the summer of 64, like, that was the selling point for Grant, and he didn't let Grant down in that regard. And
and maybe I'm just seeing it specifically here, but it almost looks like Sheridan is going through those same growing pains when he first arrives in early August of 64 with the men here in the Valley. There's doubt, especially with the Mimic War period. There's this back and forth of, what the hell are we doing? Yeah. Can this guy really get it done? And I'm sure the Confederates are sharing that same thoughts as well on the other side. But he really gains their respect, obviously, gains right after 3rd Winchester. Is that really that turning point for him and the men?
Yeah, and I think too and I read about this, sometimes people forget, like, Sheridan is doing things not all on his own accord. So like when he takes command, you have Lincoln and Stanton and Grant have given Sheridan very clear instructions, like, you cannot go after Jubal Early unless you are certain you can defeat Jubal Early, because that would be politically disastrous for Lincoln in his bid for re-election against Democratic challenger George McClellan. And so, like, a lot of that Mimic War, Sheridan always has these words ringing in his ears, don't attack unless you can be assured of victory. And then once you get to like mid-September and Lincoln's saying, okay, election's around the corner, you're not really doing anything. I mean, he writes a message to Grant saying, like, I will send Sheridan 10,000 more troops if it means he'll do something. And that, of course, sets up the whole meeting in Charlestown. And then, of course, you have 3rd Winchester, and that's when, his star really begins to rise.
It's interesting, too, because it's like, don't attack early if you're sure that you can defeat him. I'm sure Sheridan probably felt at multiple points, I can take him, but if in the event that 1 in 1 million that I don't, that it doesn't go in my favor, then it's going to look terrible. Yeah. So he's probably playing it a little hesitant or a little cautious.
He is, and I think Sheridan is very well aware of the history of the war in the Valley. I mean, there's not a lot of Union success here at all.
When you're getting constant reports that's what leads up to the whole usefulness of Thomas Laws and Rebecca Wright. These just two small, in the grand scheme of things, two small, not important people to the war become the most important people for that moment, because Sheridan can't do anything until he gets that information. I mean, Sheridan's hearing that George Pickett's in the valley,
Right.
or on his way to the valley. It's like crazy stuff like that.
Yeah.
To where it's like, yeah, he is uncertain, and it brings into scale the size of the valley
Right.
and the geography of the valley, and
Yeah.
then what's east of us, and how all that plays to an effect.
And I think there's a great lesson in all of this that we can kind of apply to our own daily lives, right? So people rush to judgment all the times with everything, and there are a lot of guys in the newly constituted Army of the Shenandoah who are writing like, Sheridan's a disaster, he should be replaced, all this kind of stuff. And I always think about the words of John Meade Gould of the 29th Maine, who was one of the great, our late friend Nick Paserno, was an expert on the 29th Maine, and John Meade Gould. And Gould wrote basically like, before we judge Sheridan, let's just see what he does.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in society in general, so maybe we're not all that different from our ancestors, but like we want to rush to judgment before we know what's truly going to happen and what someone's truly like. And I think Gould was right. Like, let's just see what he does. He's not doing so hot right now, but got to give him more than a couple days or a couple of weeks. And of course, when Sheridan starts winning, he becomes not only, a sensation within the Army, but a sensation throughout the North.
Yeah. And we can't talk about Sheridan in the Valley without highlighting the burning.
Yeah.
It's really what defines him if people don't know him that well, or his post or pre-war involvements. But the burning in 1864 in the Shenandoah Valley defines him. Can you describe researching him for the book and him as a person? What causes Sheridan to enact the burning, and then how does it affect him as an individual in the future and in a memory?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously again, Sheridan is not acting on his own accord here. I mean, he has guidance from, Lincoln is a proponent of this. Grant is a proponent of it. Halleck, others are proponents of this. And again, it's this idea that, and Sherman has the same perspective in Georgia, right? You have to limit and paralyze the Confederacy's ability to feed its soldiers and supply itself. And so, when Sheridan gets to that moment in time where he enacts the burning in late September after Fisher's Hill, it's interesting because I don't think there is a great sense of joy within him for doing this. He issues, and again, this is something that others haven't written about. John Heatwell a little bit wrote about this, right, in his classic study of the burning. But Sheridan basically gave everyone in the Valley warning, like, I am doing this. We're going to destroy things of military necessity. So it wasn't like this wild orgy. We're just destroying and looting everything. It's taking things of military necessity, which again is still economically catastrophic for the Valley civilians. I don't want to diminish that. But Sheridan said, like, we are willing to give you a wagon and help you get your stuff out. And so obviously there's a lot of Unionists who take that deal. The Confederates are like, shove it. We're not going to stay here. We're going to stay here and we're going to fight you. And there are these moments that I write about in the book where Sheridan is sitting having conversations with Unionists in the Valley. There's a Unionist in Rockingham County he has a conversation with, and he's like, I'm really sorry we're about to burn your crops, but I want you to understand why we're doing this. And if you're really loyal to the Union, like, you have to understand that this sacrifice is necessary, because we can fight battle after battle after battle, but the war is going to go on endlessly if we don't cut off the ability to feed the soldiers and to supply the soldiers. And so, when those kind of things happen, it's not easy for any civilian to hear, Unionist, Confederate, or otherwise. But, Sheridan's trying to tell them, like, well, the government will reimburse you. And yeah, you'll get reimbursed like decade down the line. You see that in the Southern Claims Commissions. But I think this was something that really, I think there are moments, particularly when he has to destroy Unionist property or black property of black civilians, that this is something that really bothers him. And then, of course, there's that moment where he orders the burning of Dayton, Virginia, after the death of Lieutenant John Rogers Meigs. And this is one of those moments where Sheridan is in a mad rage because he adored Meigs. He was Montgomery Meigs' son, cut down in the prime of his life. And he's like, destroy Dayton and destroy everything within a 5 or 10 mile radius of Dayton. And of course, at the last moment, Sheridan, pulls that order. I mean, Custer's going out and burning the area around Dayton, but Dayton is saved. And, John Heatwell wrote in his book on the burning, and this, that kind of informs some of my thinking a little bit, that the officer who was tasked with doing it, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Wilds of the 116th Ohio, he refused because he thought it was an immoral order, and Sheridan rescinded it. And some have speculated and that Sheridan did it because he had respect for Wilds as an officer and thought, okay, so this is like one of those moments. I'm going to do something. I'm going to be aggressive, and then I'm going to pull back. But one of the other there was a staff officer in Alfred Torbert's cavalry who wrote that he thought Sheridan never ever intended to burn Dayton at all. So it's like, we're going to make the threat, we're going to freak the civilians out, and then at the last moment, I'm going to pull that.
And we talked about this quote before we started recording, and I forget his name already, but he says, comparing the barn to one life.
Right.
And I think that's impactful and a refresher to
what's
remember.
Worse in war, to kill a man or burn a barn.
Yeah. And it just shows you how, even though we were 3.5 years in by that point, it was just, the war was coming to this point where so much has already been done. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, to kind of expand on this a little bit. So, many of your listeners have read Bud Robertson, the great Civil War historian. He was my graduate professor at Virginia Tech. And I remember Bud Robertson in one of our reading seminars telling us that Confederates should have been thankful for William Tecumseh Sherman, because had he not brought the destruction he brought, the war would have continued on much longer and more lives would have been lost. So it's kind of this idea: what's worse in war? Kill a man or burn a barn.
Yeah, yeah. So, and this put it in perspective for me that Sheridan wasn't in the Valley that long,
right?
But this effect that he has and this lore, that he still lives on today, some of these families that were affected by the burning, the reunions, the artwork, it just, Sheridan had his impact here. As we transition into 65, he's called back east to assist with the end of the war. He plays a really prominent role in choking out Lee's army as they're trying to move south. And he's present in the McLean house as they sign the surrender. He himself, doesn't he take the desk or the chairs?
Yeah. So supposedly, right, and I read about this, he offers, I think it's like $5 in gold for the table as a gift to Libby Custer, George Custer's wife. Wilma McLean said that, a lot of these Union generals were writing that, they were paying for the stuff. And he's like, they weren't paying for anything. They were just taking the stuff. And that table, of course, is at the Smithsonian Museum of American History today. But yeah, he's there, and Sheridan is so critical in that Appomattox campaign. And there are political figures. So again, when you look at kind of weighing source material and perspectives, so obviously the guys in Sheridan's cavalry command, they believe they played the most critical role in the Appomattox campaign, and so you kind of have to temper those comments a little bit. But you start to look at what people outside of his command are writing, what politicians are writing, and some of them are making the case that, not to take anything away from any of the other elements of the Army of the Potomac, but Sheridan's Cavalry Corps, that's the critical force that brings Lee to that moment at Appomattox and to the McLean House on April the 9th.
Yeah, and you do a really great job shortening it down, but illustrating the impact is to how fast they can move and just get to where they need to be, Appomattox Station, and then just coming around and being where they're not expected to be in those final days of the war, which just are, I don't know, I'm not an expert on Appomattox, but it's cool to just the day by day of how quickly, once the breakthrough takes place, does the army topple.
That's what you see of the Appomattox, the closing days, is that aggressive pursuit by Sheridan's cavalry to kind of close that gap and let the infantry catch up and kind of make it all come to fruition.
And he's there. It's him, and he gets it done in the Valley in March at the Battle of Waynesboro. But he's not. Is he here for that, or he's just
Yeah, he's still in the Valley,
but it's
on his way out.
I mean, I don't even know. That's a crazy battle because it's so quick.
Yeah.
But the war ends, and well, at least Lee's army is defeated. But the war doesn't end for Sheridan. Sheridan's
No.
not going up north,
No.
kissing babies and signing books.
Yeah.
But that shows you how valuable he is. What's the immediate reaction and use of Sheridan?
So Sheridan very much wants to go to the Grand Review in Washington. He wants to march, down Pennsylvania Avenue with his soldiers. And Grant says, "I have other plans for you."
Yeah.
And one of the things that I argue is that of that great triumvirate of Union generals, Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan, I think Sheridan, and people are going to dispute this, and that's fine. We can all have our perspectives. I think Sheridan was someone that Grant trusted more. And what makes me say that is, Sherman's at, his men are at the Grand Review. Sheridan is not, because Grant sees the next great threat coming from Mexico and Emperor Maximilian. And he sees Mexico as a place where Confederates can retreat to, and they can reorganize, and they can launch, Civil War 2.0. And so, Grant writes to Sheridan and says, "You're going to the border, you're going to the Rio Grande, because I don't think, in essence, that the war can officially be over, even though you have all these surrenders, until we deal with the issue in Mexico and we get Maximilian's regime out of there." Because, of course, France wasn't, that supporting Maximilian is not all that favorable to the United States. And so the fact that he sends Sheridan there over Sherman, I think, is very telling. I mean, Sheridan is exhausted. And you can see this in the letters he's writing to Grant. Like, he wants a break.
Yeah.
And Sheridan, or Grant's like, "No, you need to go here to the border and deal with those issues."
And I think it's refreshing to know that the war, we have to remind ourselves as Civil War historians and students that the war doesn't end in that parlor in Appomattox courthouse, that it continues. And I think legally it doesn't end until August of '66 when President Johnson signs the, so even though everybody's surrendering, but it's interesting to see Sheridan get sent out. He does not even get a chance to breathe. And so once his time along the border, is wrapped up there. Is that when he arrives in Louisiana?
Yeah, and then he's doing, that's all part of the same mission, right? So in those immediate aftermath and the immediate years after the war, you've got Mexico, you've got Reconstruction, New Orleans, all those types of things. And then eventually, he gets on to command, the Division of Missouri, where that brings him into the Indian Wars,
which is a vast area. You have great maps in the book that depict this. This huge area he has to control, and he's out there controlling it for a little bit. But does he not base a lot of this control out of Chicago?
Out of Chicago, correct?
Yeah, and this is at this point in his life he meets and marries
Irene,
his wife.
Yeah,
begins to have children.
Yeah.
Does he have a good work-life balance at his time in Chicago?
He does. Yeah, Chicago is so where he's in Chicago for probably for the longest stint of his entire life. And Sheridan wrote when he left Chicago to come to D.C. to become commanding general of the Army in the early 1880s, he said that Chicago was like the happiest place where he ever lived, because it's where he got married, where all of his kids were born, and he really does have a good life-work balance. And Sheridan is watching, obviously, what's going on with the various conflicts with indigenous peoples, but he is not doing anything to take time away from his kids or his family. And so there is a tender side to Sheridan that you don't oftentimes get to see. And I remember, delving into the relationship between Sheridan and his wife, how very affectionate they were with each other, how much of a bond they had with each other. And honestly, there were moments, like, I'm not Phil Sheridan, but there were moments that reminded me of the relationship I have with my wife. Like, his wife always came first with everything.
And I think that's what it struck me as I was reading. I was like, oh, snap, Sheridan wasn't married during the war.
Yeah.
I didn't, it just never dawned on me. And maybe because of that, he was able to just give the war his all. What did he take leave once to go back to Ohio to see his family?
Yeah.
But I mean, he was the war was his life.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to see that.
Yeah. And the war, right. It was his life, and the military was his life. But I start to see, letters to Grant, like after the war, he's physically drained.
Yeah.
Like he needs a serious vacation. Yeah.
Does he ever take that?
Yeah, eventually he will.
That's right.
Early 1870s.
This guy has a crazy life. I forgot.
He goes to Europe during the Franco-Prussian War, and he goes there as an observer. But it's not just the Franco-Prussian War. I mean, he is going to all different kind of. He goes to Ireland. He goes to England. He goes to Scotland. He goes to Italy. Victor Manuel, invites him to his private hunting reserve. All this kind of stuff. Sheridan is greeted formally at the British Parliament, and like that's a part of the Sheridan story that really hasn't received a lot of attention. Like, yes, the Franco-Prussian War, and Sheridan actually kind of was bored with it, because he thought the soldiers on both sides sucked, and he's like,
they could learn a thing from us.
From the Americans. Like he went there to learn from them, and he's like, I think they could learn a thing or two from the United States. But Sheridan, the fact that he was welcomed everywhere as a hero. Like there was a special archaeological dig at Pompeii in his honor. And like this illustrates to you, because someone asked me at a talk recently I gave about Sheridan, like where would you rank him among all American generals? I'm like, that's an enormous question. I'm like top 20, I don't know. But Sheridan is an enormously popular person globally, because of what he does during the Civil War. And like everywhere he's going, he's getting standing ovations and people are giving things in his honor. That to me shows the remarkable connection that Sheridan has with people, shows the remarkable level of his status and stature in the world.
I mean, there was at one point in time, he was probably one of the world's famous people.
Yes.
And I think obviously if he would have became president, if he, chose to.
Put him over the top. Sure.
Yeah, he'd be a household name. And it's the fact that he's never president, I think, that doesn't elevate him to modern day, people know, little Phil Sheridan. And you just know him because, people know him because of the commands, with the Cavalry Corps and the Army of the Potomac. I'm biased. A lot of people just really know him because of the Valley, but this post-war impact is insane. And you reminded me that he is absolutely wore out. And is it when Grant's president, he makes the request? He's like, I really just want to go watch this war. I need a break.
That's right.
And he's there for 9 months.
Yeah.
And he just travels Europe, and it's cool. I mean, it's cool to just see him relax and take it all in and
relax.
He's
my vacation is taking a break from the military to go watch war.
And he gives up on that. That bores him too much.
And then he comes back and he's like, I'm super refreshed and ready to hit it again. And
how refreshing.
And again, all throughout the 1870s, he's at in moments in time, like he's sent to New Orleans to again quell the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists, and he's dealing with indigenous peoples and. Yeah, I mean, but he is a guy, like once he comes back, once he gets married, he is really kind of figure out like how can I balance my life.
Yeah, and it's cool to note as well. He's not just in New Orleans once. He's there. He has his impact on the population,
and he hates it. He hates it. Yeah, he hates New Orleans. Like when he is sent there during the election of 1876 in case there's violence. And that's the moment I write about, like he gets the train derails on the way to New Orleans. He has a cold. He's grouchy. He's like, I don't want to be here. And so, of all the places in the United States that he hated the most, it is unequivocally New Orleans.
I mean, he's writing like, just get me out of here. And it's interesting but when it just showed me how powerful he was when he was there, because he was having to deal not just with the whole race relations thing and the Klan and reconstructing this massive port city, but the effects of the failures of Reconstruction, in the sense of you have these, former Confederates now taking command of the political sphere and the economy, and there's the whole rebuilding of this state down to the city. And he has to deal with that now too. And he's just like, no, we're not doing that. And he's just like, putting his power over all of it when he's down there. And then he leaves and, it all falls apart again. Yeah. So that whole aspect of Sheridan is really fascinating. And the people back to Chicago, when he leaves Chicago, they're just devastated too when he leaves, right?
Yeah. I mean, they adored him. I mean, when they had the Great Chicago Fire, he does things that certainly the governor of Illinois doesn't like, because he thinks that it's, the federal government coming in and exerting their power and authority. And Sheridan's just like, people's houses have burned down,
Yeah.
their businesses, I want to help them so they're not living out in the cold. But yeah, I mean, the citizens of Chicago buy him a house in Washington, D.C. For him to live in with his family when he becomes commanding general of the army.
Yeah. And what's the separation in years between his death and Grant's death?
So yeah, Grant dies in 85, so there's
Okay.
3 years, and Sheridan dies in 88.
And how does Sheridan take the death of Grant?
Yeah, he is distraught, and so Sheridan didn't think that he was going to be able to get out of his duties and make it to New York for the funeral in time. He was a pallbearer at Grant's funeral, as was Sherman, and there's a moment, according to some accounts, where he breaks down at the grave. Like, this is not just an honored general. This is a friend. This is someone who helped him. Obviously, Grant sees something in Sheridan, strings him along, brings him along in his military career. Sheridan is grateful for that, grateful for the support, and it's really hard for Sheridan. I mean, he wanted to. So Sheridan, when Grant was at Mount McGregor in his final months, Fred Grant was writing Sheridan in Chicago saying, we really want you to come here and see him, all this kind of stuff. And Sheridan's just like, I can't bring myself to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to see him as a broken man. And so he doesn't go.
Which I think is really refreshing, and this is why biographies can be really good, is it allows for you to see yourself in this person that's been idolized and this mythological creature that is these generals and presidents. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can connect to that.
Yeah.
You see them you see their faults. We have faults. You see them for their perfections. We have those as well. But then these moments of, oh, I've been in that situation and I've been the same way.
Yeah.
You
And
see
that's,
the
and that's,
humanity.
yeah. And that was one of the goals, right? So I think that not to take anything away from anything previously that's been written about Sheridan, but I always felt that it was I was very unsatisfied, right? In that you had an accounting of what Sheridan did, but you didn't understand who he was.
Yeah.
And you kind of missed that humanity. You got a little bit like, oh, he's, burning this but like you really didn't understand the nuance of his life.
Yeah. And I saw a lot of similarities between obviously Grant and Sheridan in those final years. Sheridan eventually will write his own autobiography.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, and then transition, how with his wife as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, Sheridan finally signs a contract in late 1886 with Charles L. Webster and Company, same publishing company that published Grant. And of course, it was started by Mark Twain several years earlier. And Sheridan had like this grand ambition. He would write from, his early childhood, go all the way through until the moment he became commanding general of the army in the early 1880s. And then you get to, very shortly after he signs that contract, he's diagnosed with heart disease. And so Sheridan kind of has to, scale the biography or scale the memoirs down a little bit. He ends with the Franco-Prussian War. And then, of course, he completes that manuscript in March of 1888. And then in August, he dies. And it's interesting, in his final weeks, he spends his final weeks at a cottage the family built in Nonquit, Massachusetts. That was his refuge in the final years of his life. And to look through the papers, Sheridan's papers at the Library of Congress, of letters. I mean, we're talking thousands of letters sent to him in his final months and weeks, talking about how, from veterans, like how much they admire him, love him. There was one GR post that sent him a meat press. So like he couldn't chew, like he didn't have enough strength. And so it was like you take a steak and cook it and squeeze the meat out.
Oh my gosh.
So you could have like juice of the meat and pureed food and stuff. And I just thought that was really, interesting. Like they're trying to help him in any way that they possibly can. And then of course, he passes away in August of 1888. And there is a period of national mourning, right? So the Capitol is draped in black, and people are praising Phil Sheridan for what he does. Interestingly enough, Cardinal Gibbons, who delivers the eulogy for Sheridan at St. Matthew's Cathedral, like he focuses on the Valley. He focuses on Sheridan's ride as like the defining moment of this guy's career. And then, you know, obviously after his death, then Irene takes over in terms of the battle for legacy. So there are, you know, people wanting to write books about Sheridan. Frank Byrne, Richard Hinton, for instance, are writing a biography of him. And they're like, you know, he was our intimate friend and he consulted on the manuscript. And Irene Sheridan's like, bull crap, you know, he didn't do anything. And so she calls him out. And so there's this war that goes on. But Irene Sheridan really does a lot to make certain that her husband is remembered the way he wanted to be remembered, as a general first and foremost who cared about his men, led by example, and was aggressive on the battlefield. And so, you know, every time there's like a monument to pop up to Sheridan, whether it's the one in D.C. or Chicago or wherever, Mrs. Sheridan intervenes and tries to make certain that the artist is portraying her husband how he wanted to be portrayed. And of course, there are many moments where she gets her way. There's one moment, the statue in Albany, New York, that sits in front of the state capitol, which was interestingly enough supposed to be the one that was in D.C., but she hated the design because Sheridan, it was depicting him later in life. He was large at that time. And people like to make jokes all the time, oh, we like to eat. Sheridan had heart disease and he's filling up with fluid.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's going to the Golden Corral and just, you know, loading up on food. It's a symptom of a health crisis that he's going through.
And he's a shorter guy. So a little goes a long way.
Yeah. And so, you know, Mrs. Sheridan is wanting to make certain that statue that's in Albany, she hated it. She's like, it's not a great representation of my husband. And so it wasn't in D.C. because of her. Goodson Borglum, you know, sculpted that one. But eventually it's picked up by citizens in Albany. And despite her protest, it's there. But, yeah, I mean, she plays, you know, for the next half a century after his death, plays such a really critical role in you know, making certain that he is remembered in a particular way as he wanted to be remembered. And also I think what's kind of illustrates the relationship, you know, when she realized where the monument was going to go to him in D.C., she sold the house that the people of Chicago gave to the Sheridans and bought a house near the monument. So like she could see that sculpture of her husband every day. And that's just one of those things that kind of gets me.
Yeah.
Right. It shows the deep bond and affection that they had.
Yeah. And I think you cover that well. I don't think a lot of biographies do that, where they continue the memory aspect. Yeah. And then also how he's represented in physical things too.
Oh yeah. I mean, he is used to like market stuff like crazy. There was a grocery company out of Rochester, New York, a wholesale grocery, Brewster Gordon Company. Like they put Sheridan, it was called Veterans Brand, and Sheridan was the logo.
Yeah.
Like they sold everything. I think I use a can of red pepper in the book as an illustration, but they sold like ammonia and corn and coffee, like everything you can imagine. His face was on it. And the fact that companies are using him to sell stuff, not only after his death, but like even during the Cold War, right? So I write about, there's this aerospace company in Texas designing missile guidance systems and missiles. And Sheridan is in the, I don't have this image in the book, but I do have a copy at home where they're basically saying like, you know, this missile is the Sheridan style. It's swift, it's aggressive.
Yeah.
Like this is in the 1950s and 60s.
That's cool.
100 years later, like he still has staying power. The Sheridan tank, you know, used during Vietnam. So, you know, people don't think about, like you think about his legacy only in terms of the Civil War or Indigenous Wars. This guy for a good century was seen as something by certain groups of people, as something we could use his image to market and convey a message. That if you buy this, you use this, this is the quality you're going to get.
Yeah. And can you shine a light on the cover of the book? There's an image used of Sheridan.
Yeah, so that is an image that's oftentimes not seen. It was done by a Chicago artist. It is a depiction of Sheridan's ride,
which is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's not one of the more popular ones, but
the uniform choice doesn't seem.
Yeah, so when authors write books, very rarely do we have control over the art. But it was one that I had suggested because of it was done by a Chicago artist.
Okay.
And so of all the places he lived, Chicago was his favorite place. And I thought this is a nice little subtle way, and the publisher accepted that. So that's why it's on there.
That's cool.
It's because of the Chicago connection.
And it's not. I've never seen it until you
Yeah.
published it. So
it's an obscure version of the ride.
yeah, because it's like a post-war, post-Civil War uniform.
Yep.
Used there. If you were to summarize Sheridan as a person and how you would want him to be, how you think he should be remembered, or personally after you've examined and got really close with him, how would I know you conclude him well there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, as I write at the end, he's a massive contradictions, right? He is someone who is very certain of himself. I think he's someone who is disciplined. He is someone who at times can be unreasonable, but also at other times he's very reasonable. But I think the biggest thing for Sheridan, who he is, how he would want to be remembered, it all comes down to leading by example.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a good leader, I think.
Fair assessment.
Well, perfect. There was so much we didn't talk about, obviously. Yeah. And if you want to learn more, you can pick up a copy of General Philip H. Sheridan, Life, War, and Memory by Jonathan Noyalas. Where can they purchase this?
So you can purchase from Rutledge. I think they're running like a 20% holiday discount. Perfect. It's on Amazon, normal online retailers like that. Yeah.
So get your copy today. It's a nice read. It's not a thick old doorstopper of a book. It's really digestible. And if folks want to keep up with you and what you're doing, where can they do that? Where can they learn more about the Shenandoah University's McCormick Civil War Institute?
You can subscribe to our quarterly newsletter. You can visit su.edu/MCWI, and there's a subscription button there. Also follow the Civil War Institute on social media, so Facebook. If you're not a friend, you can ask for permission to be added to the list. Also on Twitter, or X now, I guess it's called.
Yeah, exciting stuff. They published their yearly journal.
That's right.
And
the great Jack Owens has a contribution in that journal.
Hey, how about that?
Hey, now, look at that. But great stuff coming out of the Institute. I'm happy to be a part of it, and you're doing amazing things there for the university. I think it's the greatest Civil War Institute in the nation. So
thank you, Jack.
Only one that owns a battlefield as well.
That's right.
Come on.
Full screen.
There you go. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Elijah, anything else to add?
Nope. The Fighting Cock has still not come to me. I still think it's maybe like marshmallow, but I'll leave that to the listeners to decide when you go pick up a bottle, but marshmallow it is.
Marshmallow's all right. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to watch and subscribe, or like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.